The innocence of childhood carries a love so pure that it remains untouched by time and untainted by the world's complexities. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Willow Creek Elementary School, casting golden patches across the polished wooden floors of Mrs. Thompson's fourth-grade classroom. 9-year-old Emily Carter sat in the third row, her light brown hair glowing like honey in the sun as she carefully copied spelling words into her notebook. Though her hazel eyes often drifted toward the boy sitting beside her, Ethan Hayes, with his sandy blonde hair that never stayed in place and eyes as blue as the summer sky. "Emily," Ethan whispered, sliding a folded piece of paper across their shared desk. "Look what I drew for you." Emily unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "Ethan plus Emily equals best friends forever," written in his careful 9-year-old handwriting. A smile bloomed across her face like sunshine breaking through clouds. "It's beautiful," she whispered back, her heart fluttering with that peculiar warmth that felt like butterflies taking flight. "I'll keep it forever." Their friendship had begun on the first day of school, when Ethan noticed Emily sitting alone at lunch, too shy to eat in front of the other children. Without hesitation, he left his group of rowdy friends and sat beside her. "Want to share my cookies?" he asked, his gap-toothed grin so genuine that Emily's shyness melted away. From that moment on, they were inseparable. They shared lunches, secrets, and dreams. Ethan always saved her the best part of his meal, and Emily helped him with reading, assignments. They built castles in the sandbox, invented secret codes, and sealed countless pinky promises. One afternoon, under the old oak tree in the schoolyard, Ethan declared, "When we grow up, I'm going to marry you, Emily Carter. We'll live in a big house with a white fence, and we'll have the happiest life ever." Emily blushed pink as a rose. "Promise?" she asked. "Cross my heart and hope to die," Ethan replied, making an X over his chest. "You'll be my wife forever." By the third month of the school year, their bond had only grown stronger. Ethan walked Emily home every day, carrying her books and picking wildflowers along the way. They sat on her porch steps sharing popsicles, planning weekend adventures, catching minnows in the creek, searching for four-leaf clovers, or lying in the grass making shapes out of clouds. But the peaceful rhythm of their world shifted one afternoon in class. "Children, please turn to page 47 in your arithmetic books," Mrs. Thompson announced. Ethan fumbled, distracted by a comic book hidden inside his desk. Emily noticed and quickly tapped her open book to guide him, but Mrs. Thompson's sharp voice cut across the room. "Mr. Hayes, perhaps you'd like to share what's so fascinating inside your desk." Ethan froze, his face burning red. He knew the comic book would mean detention, a note home, and worst of all, his father's disappointment. His father, Richard Hayes, already pressed him hard about school, grooming him for the family empire he would someday inherit. Emily's heart raced as she saw Ethan tremble. Without thinking, she jumped to her feet. "It was me, Mrs. Thompson," she said bravely. "The comic book is mine." The room fell silent. Ethan stared at her in shock, his blue eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. "Miss Carter," Mrs. Thompson said slowly, "are you telling me that you were the one disrupting my class?" Emily's knees knocked beneath her plaid skirt, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, ma'am. I was reading it during arithmetic. Ethan was only trying to tell me to put it away." The lie tasted bitter, but seeing the relief flood across Ethan's face made it worth it. "You'll stay after school for detention, Miss Carter," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "You'll write, 'I will not bring inappropriate reading material to class 100 times.'" "Yes, ma'am," Emily whispered. As the teacher returned to the front, Ethan reached under the desk and squeezed Emily's hand. The warmth of his palm sent a shock of emotion through her small body. His lips formed the silent words, "Thank you." That afternoon, while Emily sat in the empty classroom writing her punishment lines, Ethan waited outside the school, ignoring his mother's driver who honked impatiently. When Emily finally emerged, tired with ink-stained fingers, Ethan presented her with a bouquet of dandelions he had picked from the lawn. "You're the bravest girl in the world," he told her. "And someday, when we're married, I'll make sure you never have to. Sacrifice anything for me again." Emily smiled, clutching the wilting dandelions as though they were precious roses. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat, Ethan Hayes. That's what people do when they love each other." They walked home hand in hand, their shadows stretching long in the setting sun. Neither of them could have imagined that within weeks, Ethan's father would arrive with news that would change everything. Richard Hayes had found a business opportunity in New York, one too important to refuse. The family would move immediately. The most beautiful childhood love story in their small town was about to be torn apart. For now, though, Emily and Ethan were only two children in love, walking home together as golden leaves swirled around their feet, completely unaware that their perfect world was about to shatter. Time can separate people, but true love never really dies. It waits in silence, hidden inside the heart, never letting go. The fluorescent lights of Crestview General Hospital glared down on the busy night shift. But for Emily Carter, now 29 and a registered nurse for 6 years, the chaos had become familiar. Her calm hands and compassionate heart made her beloved among both patients and colleagues. The shy little girl from Mrs. Thompson's classroom had grown into a confident woman whose beauty came from kindness, warmth, and quiet strength. "Emily, we've got incoming," called Dr. Martinez. From across the trauma bay. "Minor car accident, male victim, 29 years old, ETA 3 minutes. Emily nodded, already preparing the examination room. Years of training kept her focused, though she whispered her usual silent prayer for the patient, hoping his family wouldn't face heartbreak tonight. The automatic doors burst open as paramedics wheeled in their patient. Emily lifted her clipboard, ready for her assessment, but the world seemed to stop when she saw his face. Those eyes. Those impossibly blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for 2 decades. Ethan. The name escaped her lips in a whisper as her clipboard slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. The man on the gurney turned toward her voice, his pale face bruised from the accident. Recognition dawned in his expression. "Emily." "Oh, my God, Emily, is it really you?" In that instant, 20 years collapsed into nothing. She was 9 again, standing in that classroom protecting him from punishment. And now here he was, taller, older, more refined, but unmistakably Ethan Hayes. "I need to check your injuries," she stammered, torn between her professional duty and the emotional earthquake inside her chest. Her hands shook as she reached for her stethoscope, but Ethan caught her wrist gently. "Not yet," he said softly. "Please, just let me look at you. I've dreamed of this face for 20 years. The emergency room bustled around them, but Emily felt trapped in a bubble, where only the two of them existed. His jaw was stronger now. A faint scar above his left eyebrow hinted at the years between them, but his hair still fell across his forehead in the same boyish way. He was devastatingly handsome, yet all she could see was her Ethan. "You're real," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "All these years I wondered if I imagined how perfect you were. You're even more beautiful than I remembered." "Ethan, I have to," she began, but he was already sitting up despite protest from Dr. Martinez. "Emily," he said her name like a prayer, like she might vanish if he spoke too loudly. "I looked for you. I looked everywhere." Before she could respond, before her professional instincts could pull her back, his hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones as if memorizing her. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. And then his lips found hers. The kiss began soft and hesitant, as if he couldn't believe she was real. But when Emily closed her eyes and leaned into him, 20 years of separation exploded into a storm of passion and longing. Her hands pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and she kissed him back with all the love she had carried since childhood. It was their first kiss, yet it felt like coming home. Like every whispered promise under the oak tree had finally come true. "Emily," Dr. Martinez's sharp voice cut like a blade. "Focus, please." Emily jerked back, cheeks burning, her heart racing out of control. She was a professional, and she had just kissed a patient in the middle of the emergency room. "I'm sorry," she whispered, forcing herself to grab her clipboard again. "I need to examine you properly." Ethan caught her hand before she could pull away. Don't apologize, not for this, never for this. You think I wasn't listening, but I heard you. When you whispered my name just now, I heard everything. Emily stared at him in disbelief. How did you know? Because my heart has been saying the same thing for 20 years, he replied with quiet certainty. Emily, 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 it's the only word it knows. Her hands trembled as she checked his pupils, gently probed the cut on his forehead, and listened to his heart and lungs. Every touch sparked memories of childhood and dreams that never faded. Tell me about the accident, she asked, trying to stay steady. Rear-ended at a red light. The other driver was texting. Just some whiplash and scrapes, nothing serious. He paused, his voice softening. I was driving through town. I've done it twice before over the years, hoping to find you. Her hand stilled on his wrist. You came back? Every few years, when missing you became unbearable, I'd drive past the school, your house, but you were gone. Mrs. Patterson next door told me you left for nursing school. His voice cracked. I thought I'd lost you forever. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She had tried for years to convince herself she'd moved on. But here, he was admitting he never had. I went to nursing school in Chicago. Then I came here to Crestview 6 years ago. I never went back home either. Too many memories. His fingers intertwined with hers naturally, like no time had passed. I need to confess something, he said softly. The accident tonight wasn't just chance. I wasn't paying attention, because I was thinking about you. I was driving past our old school, remembering the day you took detention for me. I couldn't focus on anything else. A tear slid down Emily's cheek. You remember that? I remember everything, Ethan said fiercely. Every note you passed me, every time you held my hand, the way you smelled like strawberry shampoo, your laugh when I told silly jokes. I remember the day you promised to marry me under the oak tree, and I remember the day my father told me we were moving. The longest 3 days of my life, Emily whispered. Until tonight. Ethan, replied, his voice breaking. I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought I'd spend my life wondering what if. Dr. Martinez returned, forcing Emily to step back, her face flushed. She reported quickly. Minor injuries, no concussion. He's cleared for discharge with standard whiplash instructions. Excellent. Mr. Hayes, you're free to go home, Dr. Martinez said, moving on. Ethan sat up, his eyes never leaving Emily's. My shift ends in an hour, she said quietly, her voice trembling with hope. I'll wait, he answered instantly. I've waited 20 years, I can wait another hour. As he left for the waiting room, he turned one last time. Emily, that little girl who once took detention for me, she grew up to be the most incredible woman I've ever known. And this time I'm not leaving without you. Emily pressed her hand to her chest as he disappeared behind the curtain, her heart pounding so wildly she wondered if joy itself could make her collapse. After 20 years of missing him, her childhood sweetheart was back, and he still loved her. Some loves are written in the stars, destined to find their way back no matter how much time or distance tries to keep them apart. The hospital cafeteria at midnight was a lonely place, filled with the hum of vending machines and the shuffle of tired staff. Emily Carter sat across from Ethan Hayes at a corner table, still struggling to believe he was real. She had changed. Out of her scrubs into jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair now loose around her shoulders. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. Every few seconds he reached across the table to touch her hand, as if he needed that connection to prove she wasn't a dream. Tell me everything, he said softly, tracing circles on the back of her hand. 20 years, Emily. I want to know every single day. She laughed, the sound like music he didn't realize he'd been starving for. 20 years is a lot of days, Ethan Hayes. Where do I even start? Start with the day after I left, he said quietly. I used to imagine what you did that first morning when you realized I was gone. Emily's smile faltered. I waited on the porch for 3 hours. I kept thinking you'd come running around the corner to tell me it was all a mistake. Ethan's chest ached. Emily, I cried for 2 days straight. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I just cried. Her eyes softened with memory. I kept your drawing, the one with the stick figures under the rainbow. I carried it in my backpack through school, through nursing college. Even now it's in my purse. You still have it? His voice was barely a whisper. Emily pulled out a worn, carefully folded piece of paper. The crayon colors had faded, the edges soft from years of being opened, but the two stick figures and rainbow were still clear. Ethan held it reverently, his vision blurring with tears. You kept this all these years. It was all I had left of you, she said simply. On the worst days, when everything felt impossible, I'd look at it and remember what it felt like to be loved that purely. I can't believe you never gave up on us when I did so many times, Ethan admitted. I was disappointed, heartbroken, even angry sometimes. But I never gave up. Something deep inside always told me true. Love finds a way. Ethan pressed her hand to his lips. Tell me about nursing school. Her face lit up with pride. Northwestern in Chicago, scholarship student, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. It was hard, but I loved every minute. There's something powerful about helping people, being there when they're most vulnerable. You were always meant to be a healer, Ethan said with certainty. Even when we were kids, you took care of everyone. And you? Emily asked. What about New York? Ethan's expression darkened. Harvard Business School, then straight into my father's empire, Hayes Enterprises, real estate, luxury hotels, commercial properties. My father had everything mapped out. College, career, marriage to the right kind of woman. Her heart sank. Marriage? She pulled her hand back. You're married? No, he said quickly, grabbing her hands again. God, no, never. I've never even come close. Relief flooded her chest, though her voice shook. But you said your father had marriage plans. His plans, not mine. He's been pushing me toward the daughter of his business partner. But how could I marry someone else when my heart has belonged to you since I was 9? Emily's eyes filled with tears. But that's 20 years of loneliness. 20 years of waiting, he corrected gently. Yes, I dated. I tried to move on. But every woman I met I compared to you. None of them ever measured up. She lowered her gaze. I know what you mean. I dated too. Even got engaged once in nursing school. But I couldn't love him the way I loved you. Ethan's stomach clenched. You were engaged? For 6 months. David was kind, brilliant, wanted to save the world through medicine. But when he kissed me, all I could think about was a boy with messy blonde hair and blue eyes who once promised to marry me under an oak tree. Ethan smiled, remembering that moment with crystal clarity. I kept that promise, Emily. I never gave it to anyone else. For a moment they sat in silence, fingers intertwined, marveling at how perfectly they still fit together. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, catching her staring. I'm thinking about time, how strange it is. 20 years feels like forever and also like no time at all. You're different now, older, more polished. But you're still the boy who saved dandelions for me. And you're still the girl who was brave enough to sacrifice herself for love, Ethan replied, brushing her knuckles with his lips. He glanced at his watch. It's almost 1 a.m. I should get you home. Where are you? Staying? My apartment's close by, Emily said, her pulse quickening. It's small, but maybe you could come, just for coffee. I'm not ready to say goodnight. Ethan's smile lit up his whole face. I'd love nothing more. Her apartment was modest, a single bedroom in a converted Victorian house, furnished with thrift store finds and decorated with warm fabrics and plants. Ethan looked around as she set her purse down. It's perfect. It feels like you. Warm, welcoming, full of life. Emily busied herself making coffee, aware of his eyes on her as he studied photos on her fridge, her graduation, colleagues, even her late cat. You always did love strays, Ethan said fondly. Some things never change, she replied, handing him a mug. They settled on her sofa, close enough to touch but not quite touching. Ethan set his mug aside, his voice serious. Emily, finding you again tonight, it isn't coincidence, it's fate. She frowned gently. What do you mean? I've been coming back here every few years. Tonight was the third time. I told myself it was business, but the truth is I was always looking for you. And tonight, when I crashed just blocks from the hospital where you work, that can't be random. Her eyes stung with tears. Do you really believe that? That we were meant to find each other? I believe some loves are bigger than time, distance, or family expectations. I believe what we had as children was real, and what I feel now is only stronger. Before she could lose her courage, Emily leaned forward and kissed him. This time, there was no hospital, no interruptions, no rules. This time it was just them. Two souls who had loved each other since childhood, finally free to express what they had carried for so long. The kiss deepened, 20 years of longing pouring out, in soft touches and whispered breaths. His hand slid into her hair, hers pressed against his chest, and it felt like they had never been apart. I love you, Ethan whispered against her lips. I've loved you for 20 years, and I'll love you for 20 more. I love you too, Emily replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. I never stopped, not for a single day. They held each other close on the small sofa, talking in hushed voices about their separate journeys, their memories, and their hopes for a future together. Eventually, Emily drifted to sleep in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Ethan stayed awake, stroking her hair, overwhelmed by the miracle of holding her again. Tomorrow, reality would come. His father, the empire, the obstacles they'd face. But tonight, in this modest apartment that felt more like home than any mansion ever had, he was exactly where he belonged. As dawn lightened the windows, he finally closed his eyes, still holding the woman who had owned his heart since childhood. Neither of them knew that less than 12 hours later, their love would face its first great test when Ethan walked her into the Hayes family mansion. When love collides with expectations, the heart is forced to choose between duty and destiny. The Hayes estate stretched across 15 manicured acres in the wealthiest part of the city. Its Gothic revival architecture rose like a fortress of privilege and power, its limestone walls and towering spires overshadowing everything around it. As Ethan Hayes guided his sleek BMW up the circular drive lined with trimmed hedges and Italian statues, Emily Carter felt her confidence slipping away with every passing second. The mansion loomed before her, so massive and elegant that her modest apartment seemed like a dollhouse in comparison. She smoothed the skirt of her simple black dress, the nicest piece of clothing she owned, chosen carefully for this moment. Her hands trembled. Second thoughts? Ethan asked gently, glancing at her with a reassuring smile. Maybe more than a few hundred, Emily admitted, staring at the imposing stone facade. Ethan, look at this place, look at me. I'm a nurse from a modest family. I drive a 10-year-old car. I don't belong in a world like this. Ethan parked in front of the grand oak doors beneath a stone archway. He turned to her, his blue eyes steady. Emily, this house is not my world. You are my world. This is just where I grew up, and they're going to love you. They have to, because I do. Before she could answer, the doors opened and a tall, elegant woman stepped out. Margaret Hayes, Ethan's mother, moved with the grace of someone born into refinement. Her silver-streaked blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer suit immaculate. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, immediately recognizing the tension in her son's posture. Ethan, darling, she called, her cultured voice carrying across the steps. We weren't expecting you until this evening. Her gaze shifted to Emily. And you've brought a guest. Ethan climbed out of the car, his movements confident, then hurried to open Emily's door. Mother, I'd like you to meet someone very important. This is Emily Carter. Emily stepped forward, her legs unsteady. Margaret extended a manicured hand, her expression polite but guarded. Emily, how lovely to meet you. Are you one of Ethan's colleagues? No, ma'am, Emily replied, accepting the handshake. I'm a registered nurse. Ethan and we have a history. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or unease. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from inside the marble foyer. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged, his silver hair impeccable, his tailored suit radiating power. Richard Hayes, Ethan's father, exuded authority without trying. Beside him appeared Ethan's younger sister, Charlotte Hayes, a graceful woman of 26, elegant like their mother, but softer around the edges. "Ethan," Richard's voice boomed, his tone warm on the surface but businesslike underneath. "You're early. The meeting with the Patterson Group isn't until 6. "I'm not here for business, Dad," Ethan replied firmly, sliding an arm protectively around Emily's waist. "I'm here to introduce you all to the woman I'm going to marry." The silence was absolute. The sound of the fountain in the circular drive seemed louder than ever, its water trickling cheerfully as tension thickened around them. Margaret's face paled. Charlotte's mouth fell open. Richard's expression hardened as if he had just seen a crack form in the empire he had built. "I beg your pardon," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "You heard me," Ethan said steadily. "Emily and I are getting married." "Ethan, sweetheart," Margaret interjected quickly, her voice soothing but tight. "Perhaps we should go inside and discuss this over tea. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Mother. I love Emily. I've loved her since I was 9 years old." Charlotte stepped forward, her curiosity overpowering her shock. 9 years old? "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Emily's cheeks burned as all eyes turned to her. "We knew each other as children," she explained quietly, "before your family moved to New York." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're the little girl from Willow Creek Elementary, the one Ethan never stopped talking about after we moved." Richard's jaw tightened. "The one he cried about for months. The one he swore he'd marry one day. And now I'm grown." "Up," Ethan said firmly, "and I'm keeping that promise." Richard's face turned red, the vein in his temple throbbing. "Ethan Michael Hayes," he said through clenched teeth, "you will do no such thing. You have responsibilities, obligations. The Patterson merger depends on your engagement to Miranda Patterson. Then the Patterson merger will fail," Ethan replied with frightening calm. "Are you out of your mind?" Richard's composure snapped, his voice echoing across the stone steps. "Do you have any idea what this merger represents? Everything. I've built everything this family stands for, thrown away for what? For a fantasy? What about my happiness?" Ethan shot back. "What about love?" "Love?" Richard spat the word like it was poison. "Love doesn't build empires. Love doesn't secure futures. Love doesn't put food on the table for the thousands of employees depending on us." Emily felt her heart sink as the argument grew heated. Words hurled like weapons. Charlotte stood frozen. Margaret wrung her hands helplessly. And Richard's fury blazed. "You will end this foolishness immediately," Richard barked. "You will marry Miranda as planned, or you will consider yourself no longer part of this family." Ethan's arm tightened protectively around Emily. "You would disown your own son? Over this?" "I would save you from the biggest mistake of your life," Richard snapped. His gaze shifted coldly to Emily. "You knew a boy 20 years ago. This woman is a stranger." Emily gathered every ounce of courage she had. "What we had as children was real. It was love in its purest form, and it never died." Richard's stare was like ice. "Miss Carter, let me be clear. My son is the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. He has responsibilities that go far beyond personal desire." "I understand that," Emily replied softly, but firmly. "But I also understand that your son is a man with the right to choose his own happiness." "Happiness," Richard sneered. "A luxury people in our position cannot afford. His marriage to Miranda ensures the prosperity of this family for generations. What can your love give him? A nurse's salary? A modest apartment struggle?" Emily straightened her shoulders, her voice unwavering. "I can give him love. Pure, unconditional love. The kind that doesn't depend on mergers or bank accounts." "That won't pay the bills," Richard shot back. "Stop," Ethan cut in sharply. "Both of you, stop. I've listened to these arguments my whole life. Sacrifice for the family. Marry for the business. I'm done. I've found the woman I love and I won't lose her again. Richard's voice turned cold as steel. Then you've made your choice. You have 24 hours to come to your senses. End this foolishness, or you're no longer my son. The words hit with the finality of a gavel. Margaret gasped, tears filling her eyes. Richard, no, he's our son. He was our son, Richard corrected bitterly. Now he's throwing it all away. Charlotte stared in shock. Ethan, I don't understand. Who is she really? She's the love of my life, Ethan said, pulling Emily closer. The only woman I've ever loved. As they walked back to the car, Emily's heart pounded with fear. She whispered, "What have we done?" Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice strong and certain. "We've chosen love, and that's never the wrong choice, no matter the cost." Behind them, the towering Hayes mansion shrank in the distance, but the weight of what lay ahead grew heavier with every mile. In the crucible of impossible choices, true character is revealed not by what we gain, but by what we are willing to sacrifice for love. The silence inside Emily Carter's small apartment felt heavier than the storm that had shaken the Hayes mansion just hours earlier. Ethan Hayes sat slouched on her modest sofa, his head in his hands, while Emily moved restlessly around the tiny kitchen, making tea neither of them intended to drink. The contrast between the marble halls of his family estate and the cozy warmth of her one-bedroom home had never felt more stark. 24 hours, Ethan said quietly, his voice muffled by his palms. He gave me 24 hours to choose between everything I've ever known and the woman I love. Emily set the kettle down with trembling hands and turned to him. Ethan, we need to talk about this rationally. What your father said about the business, about Miranda Patterson. I don't care about Miranda Patterson, Ethan cut in, lifting his head, his blue eyes blazing with determination. I don't care about the merger, the fortune, or any of it. But I care, Emily whispered, moving to sit beside him. I care because you're giving up your entire life for me. Your family, your career, your financial security, everything. Ethan took her hands in his, holding them firmly as if anchoring them both. Emily, listen to me. That life, that fortune, none of it ever made me happy. Do you know what the last 20 years have been like for me? She shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. Empty, he said simply. Completely empty. I had everything money could buy, the best education, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, exotic vacations, and I felt nothing but an ache because something essential was missing. Her chest tightened. Ethan, it was you, he said, his thumbs tracing circles over her hands. It was love, real love. The kind we had as children, the kind that makes everything else fade away. That's what was missing all along. Emily wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her. But what about your future? What about security? I make a decent living as a nurse, but it's nothing compared to what you're used to. What happens in 5 years? 10? When you can't have the life you've always known? Ethan glanced around her apartment, his eyes lingering on the secondhand furniture she had restored, the plants she had nurtured, the photographs that made the space warm and personal. This place has more soul than that mansion ever will. That house is like a museum, cold, impressive, and empty. But this feels like home. You say that now, Emily said softly. But what if someday it's not enough? Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice strong. Do you remember what I told you the day we left? The last thing I said before my family took me away? Emily closed her eyes, remembering the painful afternoon on her porch. His mother's car waiting, his tear-streaked face pressed against hers. You said you'd find a way back to me. And I meant it, Ethan said. And now that I've found you again, I'll never let you go. I don't care if I have to start from nothing. As long as I'm with you, I'll be the richest man alive. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. But your father looked at me like I was nothing. Your mother seemed kind, but she'll never truly accept me. Your sister was shocked. And your father? My father is a businessman first and a father second, Ethan said bitterly. He always has been, he'll never understand. But my mother, she'll come around. And Charlotte, she's always been a romantic. They'll see it eventually. Emily lowered her gaze. And if they don't, then we'll still be together, Ethan said firmly. And that's enough. Before she could respond, her phone rang. She frowned at the screen. It's the hospital. I'm not on shift tonight, she answered automatically. Emily Carter speaking. Emily, it's Dr. Martinez, came the urgent voice. Sorry to call you, but we've got a 3-car pileup coming in, multiple injuries. Can you come? Emily glanced at Ethan, torn. You have to go, Ethan said, his tone calm and certain. I could tell them I can't, she started, but he shook his head. No. This is who you are, Emily. You save people. It's one of the million reasons I love you. He stood and helped her gather her bag. There's nothing left to discuss. I've already made my decision. Tomorrow morning I'll call my father and tell him his ultimatum doesn't matter, because I've chosen you. Ethan, she whispered, her heart breaking with love and fear. He silenced her with a kiss, gentle but certain. Go save lives. I'll be here when you get back. And when you do, we'll start planning our future together. As Emily drove toward the hospital, her mind spun with dread and hope. Part of her wanted to beg him to reconsider, to choose the safe path. But a stronger part of her couldn't bear to see him trapped in a loveless marriage, crushed under the weight of his father's empire. Meanwhile, back at the Hayes estate, the family was in turmoil. Margaret sat in the grand living room, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while Charlotte paced in distress. Richard stood rigid at the window, staring out at the grounds like a general refusing to admit defeat. He's not going to change his mind, Margaret said softly. I know our son Richard. When Ethan sets his heart on something, he doesn't waver. He's infatuated, Richard snapped. It will pass. Like it passed for the last 20 years? Charlotte shot back bitterly. I was 6 when we moved, but I remember. He cried for months. He never forgot her. He was a child, Richard retorted. Children cry over lost toys, too. She's not a toy, Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. I saw the way he looked at her, the way she looked at him. That's real love. Real love doesn't secure mergers, Richard said harshly. Real love won't sustain our legacy. Margaret met his eyes, her voice quiet but firm. What legacy is worth it if it costs our son's happiness? He's never been happy, Richard. Not once in 20 years. He's been everything you wanted. Successful, polished, powerful, but never truly happy. Richard turned back to the window, his jaw set. He'll come to his senses when he realizes what he's throwing away. But deep inside, a memory stirred. His own father's anger, his own rebellion, his own marriage against his family's wishes. He buried it quickly, unwilling to admit the truth. Back at the hospital, Emily worked through the night, steady and professional, but her heart ached with every patient she touched. During a brief lull, she stepped outside for air, looking up at the stars. Please, she whispered to the universe. Please let love be enough. What she didn't know was that at that same moment, Ethan stood on her small balcony, staring at the same stars, making the same wish. He thought about every angle, every cost, and realized the math was simple. Fortune without love was nothing, but love, even without fortune, was everything. When Emily finally returned at dawn, exhausted but hopeful, Ethan was waiting with coffee, still in the suit from the night before but looking more at peace than she had ever seen him. How did it go? He asked, pulling her into his arms. We saved 3 lives, she said with a tired smile. And you? I made my decision, Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. Actually, I made it 20 years ago under that oak tree. I just needed last night to remind me that some promises are more important than anything else. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she searched his face for doubt. There was none. Emily Carter, Ethan said, dropping to one knee in her small kitchen, his voice steady and certain. Will you marry me? Officially this time. Not just as children, but as the man I am now. I can't promise you wealth or certainty, but I can promise you my heart and a life built on love. Through her tears, Emily saw their future stretching ahead. Uncertain, yes, but blazing with a happiness she had only dreamed of. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes. As he pulled her into his arms, spinning her around, the small room both laughing and crying, neither of them realized how much their love was about to cost them, or how worth it every sacrifice would be. The morning after Ethan's proposal, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Emily, Carter's modest apartment, painting golden stripes across the walls. The air smelled of fresh coffee and hope. Emily stirred awake to find Ethan Hayes sitting at the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's wrinkled suit, staring out the window with quiet resolve. You didn't sleep, Emily whispered, her voice thick with sleep. I couldn't, he admitted, turning to face her with a tired smile. I kept thinking about everything. My father, the company, the ultimatum. And then I'd look at you sleeping beside me and I knew none of that mattered. Emily sat up, her hair tumbling around her face, and touched his arm gently. Ethan, this choice. It's not just about money. It's your entire life. You're giving up power, influence, security. I'm gaining freedom, Ethan said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice for me. Not for my father, not for Hayes Enterprises. For me. And I choose you. Tears pricked Emily's eyes as he leaned down and kissed her softly. Later that morning, Ethan walked into the gleaming glass tower of Hayes Enterprises for what would be the last time. The lobby was filled with employees in designer suits, the walls lined with marble and steel, a cathedral to ambition. Everyone turned their heads as the heir of the empire strode past with a grim expression. Whispers followed him, speculation buzzing like electricity. He entered his father's office without knocking. Richard Hayes stood behind a mahogany desk, a symbol of authority, while Margaret sat on a chaise nearby, her face etched with worry. Well? Richard demanded, his steely eyes narrowing. Have you come to your senses? Yes, Ethan said, his voice steady. I've come to my senses. I'm done, Dad. I resign from the company, from the empire, from everything. You can keep your fortune, your legacy, your mergers. I don't want any of it. Richard's face turned crimson. You ungrateful boy. Do you have any idea what you're saying? I do, Ethan replied. I'm saying goodbye. Margaret gasped, tears filling her eyes. Ethan, please don't do this. You've worked so hard. Everything your father built, it's yours by right. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. Mother, I love you, but this empire has never been mine. It's his. All I've ever wanted is a life where I can breathe, where I can be happy, and I've finally found it with Emily. You'll regret this, Richard barked. You'll come crawling back when you're broken. No, Ethan said calmly. I won't, because I'll have something you gave up a long time ago. Richard's jaw tightened. And what's that? Love, Ethan answered, his voice like steel. Real love, the kind you once had and threw away. The word struck Richard like a blow. For a split second his mask slipped, revealing a flicker of pain deep in his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Get out, Richard ordered coldly. If you walk away now, you're no son of mine. I'm sorry you feel that way, Ethan said. But I have to live my life, not yours. He turned and left, his footsteps echoing like thunder across the marble floor. Margaret rose to follow, but Richard grabbed her wrist. Let him go, he growled. He's made his choice. When Ethan stepped outside, the cool breeze hit, his face carrying with it both loss and liberation. He felt lighter than he had in years, even as the weight of an uncertain future pressed down on him. That evening, back at Emily's apartment, he dropped the resignation letter onto her small kitchen table. It's done, he said simply. Emily picked it up, her hands trembling. Ethan, you really did it. I really did, he confirmed. I've walked away from the empire, from billions, From everything my father wanted me to be. Covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. For me? For us? He corrected, pulling her into his arms, because none of that meant anything without you. Emily clung to him, her heart bursting with both love and fear. I'm terrified, she admitted against his chest. So am I, Ethan whispered, kissing her hair. But at least we'll be terrified together. For the next few weeks, reality tested them. Ethan searched for jobs, but his father's influence was far-reaching. Doors slammed shut the moment the Hayes name was mentioned. He applied for management positions, consulting roles, even entry-level jobs, but rejection followed him everywhere. Emily picked up extra shifts at Crestview. General, her days stretching long into nights. She returned home exhausted, but Ethan was always waiting, cooking simple meals, massaging her sore shoulders, reminding her why love was worth it. One night, as they ate spaghetti at her tiny table, Ethan reached across and took her hand. I've been stripped of everything, power, fortune, influence, but you know what? I've never been happier. Emily smiled through her tears. Neither have I. Across town, in the Hayes mansion, Richard stood in his study, staring at a faded photograph of himself as a young man with a woman who was not Margaret, a woman he once loved deeply, but had been forced to leave for a marriage of convenience. His grip tightened on the frame. He remembered the ache of loss, the cost of ambition, and for a moment he wondered if his son's rebellion was not madness, but courage. Yet pride was a fortress he could not abandon. He set the photo down, poured himself a drink, and whispered, he'll regret it, he has to. But somewhere deep inside, he knew his son might prove him wrong. Love had given them courage, but courage alone could not pay the bills. For the first time in his life, Ethan Hayes woke up without the safety net of his family's empire. The days stretched long and uncertain as he scoured job listings, sent out resumes, and walked into interviews with hope that quickly dissolved into disappointment. At first, he applied for executive roles, confident in his Harvard degree and years of corporate experience. But the moment the Hayes name appeared on his paperwork, polite smiles turned to wary refusals. We're looking for someone with a different background. We're not currently expanding. We'll be in touch. Ethan recognized the pattern. His father's reach extended far and wide, shadowing every opportunity like a storm cloud. When the rejection letters piled up, he lowered his expectations. He applied for assistant positions, sales jobs, even roles far beneath his qualifications. The answer was always the same. The empire he had abandoned now seemed determined to keep him out of every other door. Meanwhile, Emily Carter shouldered more than her share of the burden. She volunteered for double shifts at Crestview General, coming home late with sore feet, aching shoulders, and exhaustion etched into her face. She told herself she could handle it, that she had endured worse during nursing school. But now there was another weight pressing down on her, the sight of the man she loved struggling against a world determined to break him. One evening, Ethan returned from yet another failed interview to find Emily asleep at the kitchen table, still in her scrubs, her head resting on folded arms beside an untouched sandwich. His heart ached as he lifted her gently and carried her to bed. He tucked her in, then sat awake through the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was truly enough to survive this relentless reality. The next morning, Emily found him, in the kitchen, frying eggs with dark circles under his eyes. You didn't sleep, she murmured. I couldn't, he admitted. I kept thinking about how unfair this is. You work yourself to exhaustion while I'm treated like a leper in every office. It's my fault you're carrying all this weight. She touched his arm. It's not your fault. You chose me over billions, Ethan. That was never going to be easy. But I'd rather be poor and in love than rich and alone. Her words brought him comfort, but they couldn't silence the gnawing sense of inadequacy in his chest. Days turned into weeks. Bills piled higher. Their small apartment grew colder as they cut back on heat to save money. Emily learned to stretch, groceries, making soups and casseroles from scraps. Ethan sold his luxury watch, then his tailored suits, then his car. Each sacrifice brought them closer together, yet also tested the limits of their resolve. The cracks began to show. One night, after Emily dragged herself home from a 16-hour shift, she found Ethan sitting on the floor surrounded by rejection letters. His hands shook as he held them. "I was Hayes Enterprises' golden boy," he said bitterly. "Now, I can't even get hired to stock shelves. Do you know how pathetic that feels?" Emily knelt beside him, cupping his face in her hands. "You're not pathetic, you're brave. You walked away from an empire to be true to yourself, to us. That takes more strength than any job title ever could." His eyes burned with unshed tears. "But I can't give you the life you deserve." "I don't want a life built on your father's fortune," she said fiercely. "I want a life built on us, on honesty, on love, on fighting side by side. That's the life I deserve." Her conviction steadied him, but the struggle remained. One afternoon, Ethan swallowed his pride and took a temporary job unloading trucks at a warehouse. His back ached, his hands blistered, his muscles screamed in protest, but when he handed Emily his first modest paycheck, the way her eyes lit up made every drop of sweat worth it. "We'll get through this," she whispered, kissing him deeply. Together. But even as they clung to each other, both knew the road ahead would not be easy. Emily's exhaustion grew heavier with each passing week, and Ethan's pride took blow after blow as he endured the consequences of standing up to his father. Across the city, inside the towering Hayes mansion, Richard Hayes sat in his study, listening to reports of his son's struggles. Each rejection, each hardship was relayed to him by loyal executives. He told himself it was necessary, that Ethan needed to be broken before he could return. But late at night, when the house was quiet, he would stare into the fire and remember his own rebellion decades ago, the woman he once loved but abandoned for wealth. And for the first time, doubt began to creep into his ironclad certainty. Back, in their tiny apartment, Emily wrapped her arms around Ethan as they lay in bed, whispering into the darkness, "We'll survive this. I believe in us." And though fear still lingered, Ethan believed her, because no matter how heavy the struggle, love gave them the strength to endure. Pride can silence compassion, but even the hardest hearts carry memories they can't escape. Inside the grand Hayes mansion, tension hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. Richard Hayes sat in his study late into the night, a glass of scotch untouched at his side. The firelight flickered across his face, deepening the lines etched by years of ambition. He had built an empire from nothing, transforming Hayes Enterprises into a symbol of power and wealth. Yet none of it had prepared him for the ache of watching his only son walk away. Every report confirmed the same truth. Ethan Hayes was struggling. Executives loyal to Richard quietly shut every door. Former Dijon. Colleagues refused to offer positions. Even small firms seemed suddenly unwilling to take the risk of hiring a man his father had cast out. Richard told himself it was necessary. Ethan had to learn that rebellion came at a cost. But deep in the shadows of memory, an old pain stirred. Decades ago, Richard had been young and reckless once too. He had loved a woman who wasn't deemed suitable, who didn't come from wealth or power. He had loved her with a fire that consumed him. And he had walked away when his own father demanded obedience. That choice had made him the man he was today, but the ghost of that lost love lingered in every corner of his soul. The door creaked open, breaking his reverie. Margaret Hayes stepped inside, her silk nightgown flowing softly around her, her expression weary but resolute. "Richard," she said gently, "you're still awake." "So are you," he muttered, staring into the fire. She moved closer, her eyes searching his face. "You've made your point. Ethan is suffering, but I can't stand by and watch him be destroyed." Richard's jaw tightened. He made his choice. He knew the cost. Margaret sat across from him, her voice calm but firm. "No, Richard. He knew your cost, the price of living by your rules. But that doesn't mean he deserves to be punished for loving someone." Richard's eyes flashed. "He's throwing away billions, Margaret. Generations of wealth, stability, security. For what? A nurse's salary and a rundown apartment? For happiness, she countered softly. For love. Something you once had but let go. His head snapped toward her, fury and hurt colliding. Don't. I will, she insisted, tears brimming in her eyes. Because I was there when you gave her up. I saw what it did to you. You've never spoken of it, but I know. And I will not stand by and watch you force Ethan to live with the same regret. Richard's hands tightened around the armrests of his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, he admitted, I thought I was protecting him from pain, from failure. Margaret leaned forward, her voice trembling with emotion. No. You were protecting your empire. Not him. He doesn't need billions. He needs someone who sees him, who loves him for who he is. Emily gives him that, can't you see? She's the reason he's finally alive. Richard turned back to the fire, his eyes clouded with conflict. He wanted to argue, to cling to the fortress of control he had built all his life. But the image of Ethan's defiance, the fierce love in his eyes when he spoke of Emily, would not leave him. Later that week, Charlotte Hayes joined her mother in the garden. The early spring flowers had just begun to bloom, their colors bright against the gray stone walls. Charlotte knelt to clip roses, her brow furrowed. I can't stop thinking about them, she admitted. About Ethan and Emily. He looked so sure, so certain. I've never seen him like that. Margaret smiled sadly. That's what love does. It makes us brave enough to defy even the most powerful voices in our lives. Charlotte hesitated. Do you think Father will ever come around? Margaret's gaze lingered on the house where Richard remained locked in his pride. He wants to. I know he does. But wanting and allowing are very different things. Meanwhile, across town, Emily returned home from yet another grueling double shift to find Ethan waiting with a simple dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup. He greeted her with a tired smile, his hands still rough from warehouse work. They ate in quiet companionship until Ethan spoke, his voice low. Do you ever regret it, Emily? Choosing this life with me instead of someone easier, safer? She reached across the table, her fingers entwining with his. Not for a single second. Love isn't about choosing what's easy. It's about choosing what's worth it. And you, Ethan Hayes, are worth everything. He swallowed hard, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Then I'll keep fighting. No matter how many doors close, I'll keep fighting. Because as long as I have you, I have everything. At the Hayes mansion, Richard stood alone at his study window, staring into the night. He thought of his son's words, of Margaret's plea, of the love he had once lost. His pride battled his buried regrets, and though he refused to admit it out loud, doubt had begun to carve cracks into the walls he had built around his heart. Every great love is tested, and only the strongest survive the weight of struggle. The weeks dragged on, each day heavier than the last. Emily Carter worked long shifts at Crestview General, sometimes 18 hours at a stretch, her body pushed past exhaustion. Ethan Hayes rose before dawn to labor at the warehouse, unloading crates until his muscles burned and his palms blistered. At night they collapsed together in their small apartment, too tired to speak, too weary even to dream. The bills piled up. Rent was late. The heater sputtered on its last breath, leaving their home icy during spring nights that still carried a bite of winter. They laughed about it at first, wrapping themselves in blankets and calling it camping, but the laughter grew thinner as reality pressed harder. One Friday night, Emily stumbled through the door after a double shift, her uniform stained, with blood from the emergency room. Ethan rushed to meet her, his face drawn with worry. Emily, you're killing yourself. You can't keep doing this. She dropped her bag, her hands shaking. And what choice do we have? We need the money. We're already behind on rent. His fists clenched. I should be the one providing for us, not you, running yourself into the ground while I... His voice broke with frustration. While I break my back for pennies. Her exhaustion snapped into anger. Don't you think I see that, Ethan? Don't you think I know how hard you're trying? But love doesn't pay bills. And if we can't keep the lights on, then what happens to us? The silence that followed cut deeper than shouting ever could. Ethan turned away, shame burning in his chest. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I was a fool to walk away. Emily's breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. Don't say that. Please don't say that. He spun back, his eyes wild. Look at us, Emily. You're exhausted, I'm failing, and we're drowning. If love was enough, we wouldn't be here. Her heart broke at the words, but instead of retreating, she stepped closer. You think money would make this easier? Maybe. But it wouldn't make us stronger. Do you know why I believe in us, Ethan? Because even now, at our lowest, I've never once doubted that you love me. That's more than most people have their whole lives. His chest heaved as he stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Slowly, his fury gave way to despair. He dropped his head into his hands. I don't deserve you. Emily lifted his chin until his eyes met hers. No, Ethan. We don't deserve what your father is doing to us. But we deserve each other. And I'd rather fight beside you in the trenches than sit alone in a palace. The words cracked something inside him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were his only anchor in a storm. She clung back, their tears mingling, their hearts beating in fragile unison. The next morning, Ethan returned to the warehouse, determined to prove himself. He loaded twice as many crates as before, ignoring the pain in his shoulders. His co-workers watched in stunned silence as the former heir to a billion-dollar empire sweated and strained beside them, never once complaining. At home, Emily found herself defending him to colleagues who whispered about the disgraced Hayes heir. He's not disgraced, she told them fiercely. He's more of a man now than he ever was in that empire. Their love became their shield. Every rejection letter Ethan received, every insult Emily overheard, every bill that threatened to break them. Together they faced it. Together they endured it. But the breaking point came one stormy night when their landlord knocked on the door with an eviction notice. Emily froze, her heart hammering, but Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fire in his eyes. We'll find a way. You can take the apartment, but you will not take our hope. After the landlord left, Emily buried her face in Ethan's chest, sobbing. What if we lose everything? He held her tightly, whispering into her hair. Then we'll rebuild from nothing, together. And when we do, we'll know our love is stronger than any empire. In that moment, they realized the truth. Their love wasn't being destroyed, it was being forged. Every hardship, every sacrifice, every tear was shaping it into something unbreakable. Across the city, inside the Hayes mansion, Richard Hayes received the eviction report. He read it twice, his jaw tight, his chest heavy. He told himself it proved his point that Ethan would crawl back begging, but instead, for the first time in years, his hand trembled. He saw not a failure, but his son's courage reflected back at him. Still, pride silenced compassion, and he closed the file with a snap. He'll come back, Richard muttered to the empty room. He has to. But deep inside, he knew. Ethan and Emily's love was not breaking. It was surviving. And surviving was the strongest proof of all. Some loves don't just survive the storms. They shine brighter because of them. Weeks after the eviction notice, Ethan Hayes and Emily Carter stood in their small living room surrounded by cardboard boxes. Their world felt fragile, yet their bond was unshakable. As they packed their things, Ethan's phone rang. For a moment, he almost didn't answer, expecting another rejection. But the call wasn't from a corporation or a recruiter. It was from a former coworker, a man who had quietly admired Ethan's integrity. I heard what your father's been doing, the man said. But I also heard how hard you've been working. I'm starting a small real estate firm. Nothing big, nothing glamorous. I need someone who knows the business and isn't afraid of hard work. You interested? Ethan's throat tightened. I'll take anything. Within days, he began working with the new company, not as a vice president or an heir, but as an employee starting from the ground up. The office was cramped, the pay modest, the hours long. But for the first time, His success depended on his own merit, not his father's name, not his family's empire. He thrived. Emily supported him through every step. She cut back her shifts to part-time so she could be home more, cooking dinners, helping him brainstorm, and cheering when his first small deal closed. The modest commission check he brought home meant more to them than any of the millions tied to his old life. Their love deepened in ways money could never measure. They laughed in their tiny kitchen, danced barefoot to the radio, and fell asleep in each other's arms without fear of losing what they had. Every sacrifice had only made their happiness more profound. Meanwhile, at the Hayes mansion, Richard Hayes sat alone in his study. Reports of Ethan's progress arrived weekly, slow but steady growth, a reputation for honesty, clients drawn to his resilience. Richard read them in silence, remembering his own youth, the woman he had given up, the path he had chosen. One evening, Margaret entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're proud of him," she said softly. Richard's lips pressed into a hard line. "He's making a fool of himself." "No," she corrected gently. "He's making a man of himself. And deep down you know it." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" Margaret kissed his cheek. "He doesn't need your forgiveness, Richard. You need his." The breakthrough came months later. Ethan was closing a modest deal when Richard walked into the small office unannounced. The room went silent as the legendary tycoon stood in the doorway, his presence commanding as ever. Ethan's expression hardened. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. Richard hesitated, then said words Ethan had never expected to hear. "To apologize." Shock rippled through the room. Richard continued, his voice unsteady. "I was wrong. I thought love was weakness. I thought money was everything. But I see now that you are stronger than I ever was because you chose love even when it cost you everything. I lost the woman I loved because I lacked your courage. I won't let pride make me lose my son too." For a moment, Ethan said nothing, the anger and pain of months weighing heavily on him. But then he thought of Emily, of the way she believed, in forgiveness, of the way love softened even the hardest blows. He finally nodded. "I'm not coming back to the Empire, Dad." "I know," Richard said quietly. "I don't want you to. I just want to be part of your life again. And hers." At that, Emily stepped into the office, her eyes warm but cautious. Richard looked at her with genuine humility. "Emily, I owe you an apology most of all. I judged you for what you didn't have instead of seeing the strength of what you give. You've made my son a better man. For that I'm grateful." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she reached for Ethan's hand. "All we ever wanted was your blessing, not your empire, just your love." Richard's face softened for the first time in years. "Then you have it." Months later, under the same oak tree where they had made their childhood promise, Ethan and Emily stood surrounded by family and friends. Margaret wept openly, Charlotte beamed with joy, and even Richard, though reserved, clapped the loudest when the vows were exchanged. Emily's simple white dress flowed in the summer breeze, and Ethan, in a modest gray suit, looked at her as though she were the only person on earth. When they kissed, it wasn't just the union of two people, but the fulfillment of a promise made 20 years earlier by two children who had believed in forever. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the meadow, Ethan whispered, against her ear, "I told you I'd marry you someday. I told you I'd find my way back." Emily smiled through happy tears. "And you kept your promise. You always kept it." Their guests cheered. The oak tree stood tall in silent witness. And destiny was fulfilled, not in mansions or millions, but in love that had proven itself unbreakable.